Hello families, welcome to our See Kids online class. I hope you've had a wonderful week. We have spent many weeks going through Bible characters and it has been so much fun hearing the stories. We are still learning about Bible characters of the Old Testament. Today we will hear a story about a prophet named Elijah. We will be in 1 Kings chapter 18. First off, what is a prophet? A prophet is someone who follows God and hears God speak to them. God will tell Elijah to send a message to certain people, and Elijah would do it for him. He was God's messenger. So let's catch you up on what is going on before we begin reading 1 Kings 18. Israel has been going through a number of kings, and the kings have not been obeying God very well. In fact, they have disobeyed God so much that they started building their own gods to worship. They would build large statues and worship those statues. The name of their god was Baal. They prayed to Baal, they sang to Baal, they worshiped Baal. Along with doing this, they were doing all kinds of evil things that God was not happy with. All the time, at this time, the king was King Ahab, and in Kings 18:1, God tells Elijah to go and meet with King Ahab about the things that they have done. Something else that was going on during this time was a food shortage. There had been no rain for 3 years. The ground was really dry. Water was very hard to come by. So King Ahab and the Israelites were struggling to stay alive, all the while worshiping their god Baal. God told Elijah that after what they are about to witness with Elijah, God will send rain. Ahab sent out one of his men named Obadiah to try to find some grass and water for the animals. And while Obadiah was out, he came across Elijah. So Elijah told him to go and get King Ahab and his people and bring them to him. So Ahab went to Elijah. This is where we pick up the story in 1 Kings 18:17. When he saw Elijah, he said, "Is it you, the biggest troublemaker in Israel?" Elijah answered, "I have not caused trouble in Israel. You and your father's family have caused all this trouble. You have not obeyed the Lord's commands. You have followed the Baals. Now tell Israel to meet me at Mount Carmel. Also, bring the 450 prophets of Baal there." So Ahab gathered all the prophets of Baal and his people and brought them to Elijah, and this is where it gets fun. Verse 22 says this, Elijah said, "I am the only prophet of the Lord here, but there are 450 prophets of Baal. So bring 2 bulls. Let the prophets of Baal choose 1 bull. Let them kill it and cut it into pieces. Then let them put the meat on the wood, but they are not to set fire to it. Then I will do the same with the other bull, and I will put it on the wood, but I will not set fire to it. You prophets of Baal, pray to your God, and I will pray to the Lord. The God who answers the prayer will set fire to his wood. He is the true God." All the people agreed that this was a good idea. So I guess you can say that Elijah is playing a little game with King Ahab and his people. As fun as it sounds, Elijah is there to demonstrate who the one true God is. So Elijah let Ahab and his prophets go first. Let's read what happens when they try to have Baal send a fire down. Verse 26. So they took the bull that was given to them and prepared it. They prayed to Baal from morning until noon. They shouted, "Baal, answer us!" But there was no sound. No one answered. They danced around the altar they had built. At noon, Elijah began to make fun of them. He said, "Pray louder. If Baal really is a god, maybe he is thinking, Or maybe he is busy or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping, so you'll have to wake him up. Now Elijah is just playing with them. He knows that the God of Baal would not send fire down. Let's keep reading. So the prophets prayed louder. They cut themselves with swords and spears until their blood just flowed. This was the way they worshiped. The afternoon passed, and the prophets continued to act wildly. They continued until it was time for evening sacrifice. But no voice was heard. Baal did not answer. No one paid attention. Well, it sounds like Ahab and his people's God did not respond to them. So now it's Elijah's turn to prove that his God is the one true God. He builds an altar out of stone. He cuts up the bull and places it over the wood on the altar. He also dug a ditch around the whole thing. Then this is what he had the people do in verse 33 and 35. Fill 4 jars with water, put the water on the meat and on the wood. Then Elijah said, do it again. And they did it again. And then he said, do it a 3rd time. And they did it the 3rd time. So the water ran off of the altar and filled the ditch. So before Elijah prayed to God to send fire on his altar, he had Ahab's people pour lots of water all over it. Again, I think Elijah is having a little fun here, knowing that his God will respond. So after this, Elijah prayed to God to show the people that he is the one true God. He prayed that they would know that he is the one in control and that he can bring the people back to him. Then this happens in verse 38 and 39. Then fire from the Lord came down. It burned the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the ground around the altar. It also dried up the water in the ditch. When all the people saw this, they fell down to the ground and they cried, "The Lord is God! The Lord is God!" Wow! Can you believe it? The Lord sent the fire down and burned up the wood and the bull. But not just that, the fire even burned up the stones and the ground below it. It even dried up all the water. Some might say that this was just God showing off a little. But the truth is, there is only one true God, and God needed the people to believe that. I'm glad Elijah was there to listen to God and send the message to Ahab and his people. As you can see, once they saw this happen, they started yelling, "The Lord is God," and they believed. You see, we may never see stories about fire come raining down from the sky above or rocks being turned away, but we know that there are going to be times where people will turn away from God and his purpose for us. They may even worship things not meant to be worshiped. Just like King Ahab and his people worshiped a statue, we find ourselves worshiping things today. When you worship something, you're showing interest in something and loving something, giving your attention to that something. Maybe it's the toys you have, or the money you want, or expensive clothing and food. Whatever it is, we can sometimes fall into the trap of worshiping these kinds of things. I mean, do some of you dance around when you get a new toy? It's all right. It's not a bad thing to celebrate and be joyful. But when you begin to put those things in front of your relationship with God, that is when we have taken it too far. Let's take a step back today and think about where we put most of our time. Do we put more time in our toys and other things, or do we put more time in loving God and loving others? Let's try to bring some balance in our lives so that in all that we do, we worship the one true God. Let's fold our hands and bow our heads in prayer. Dear God, You are the one true God. You created all the earth and everything in it. Help us to not turn away from your ways. Let us not worship things, but worship you. We love you, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hi, families. What an amazing story we just witnessed. I am amazed at how powerful our God really is. I am glad that Elijah was there to show Ahab and his people that they were worshiping a false god. A false god is something that isn't real. We will talk about that more in a little bit. But first, if I'm hearing the story correctly, it said that King Ahab and his people worshipped a god named Baal. Baal was made up. They had statues in honor of Baal, and they sang to it and praised it. Basically, they took an object and prayed to it, sang to it, worshipped it, even though it wasn't a real god. How does that apply to us today? Well, we don't necessarily make up gods, but we do find ourselves worshiping things not meant to be worshiped. Let me explain. When you worship something, you love it, you celebrate it, you give your attention to it. That's what Ahab and his people did to Baal. So we all have a Baal in our life. What do you think I mean by that? Well, it means that there's some things in life that you spend a lot of time on. Maybe it's a specific toy like this, or it could be video games, or music, or celebrities, or sports, or even food. So let's take this toy for example. My boys really like this toy. They could play with it all day and never let it go. Is that a good thing? Well, it's not a bad thing to play with it, but when you put all your time and energy into it, do you have time for family or friends or God? You see, we sometimes put people or material things in front of our relationship with God. When we do that, we lose focus of who we are fully to worship. And that is the one true God that Elijah worshiped. And we do too. So what are some things in your life that distract you from giving time and energy to God? I want you to take a few seconds and think about what that is. Then take some time to pray that God gives you the patience and control to not worship the things that aren't meant to be worshiped. Then ask God to help turn your focus to Him and what He wants from you. That's what King Ahab and his people needed. They needed a wake-up call, and they were spending too much time worshiping the wrong thing. Because let me tell you something, only God can do anything and everything. He can do the impossible. He is the one who created the world and everything in it. So He deserves our attention, our worship, our prayers. Oh, and speaking of doing the impossible, remember in the story when Elijah prayed and God sent fire down to burn the bull and the wood? What else did it burn? That's right, it even burned the rocks away and the ground beneath. It even dried up all the water. So I figured we ought to try an experiment. Do you think we can burn any of those things? Well, I have a rock. I have some dirt, and I have some water. I'm going to put the fire on each one and see if I can burn it away. Let's start with the rock. Okay, here we go. Well, I saw the fire on it, but it's not burning up the rock. Nope. The rock is still right there. Okay, let's try next the dirt. The dirt didn't burn up, did it? It didn't even catch on fire. Well, that really didn't seem to work, did it? Nope. Okay, now let's try the water. Well, it doesn't look like the fire is burning any of these things up. The water just puts out the fire, Isn't that amazing that the fire God is able to send can burn all of this to nothing? So this goes to show how powerful our God really is. God can do the impossible. That's the God that I serve and love. That's the God we are meant to share with those around us. Let's do that this week. And remember, focus on loving God and loving others. Bye-bye.